Hi yet again, folks. Here to talk to you in abnormal psychology about bipolar disorder, what we now call the bipolar and related disorders, because there's two kinds of bipolar disorder, bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, and related disorders, which include something called cyclothymia. Now, in your PowerPoint, there is a link to a video that is very, very useful because it depicts a lot of the different kinds of symptoms a person can have when they're having a manic episode. And in this video, a patient is being asked questions by a psychiatrist who's trying to do a clinical interview, and you're going to see lots of different things. And I want you to see how many symptoms you can pick up after you've watched this after you watch this video, excuse me. Okay, so again, three different ones we're going to look at. So what's a major depressive episode? You know what that is. And so people with bipolar 1 disorder have this full major depressive episode. Looks just like major depressive. Somebody walked in to talk to you and they talked about depression. You actually don't know until some time whether it's just major depressive disorder or until you see the other side of it, the expansive upward movement into a hypomanic or full manic state, that you're really looking at bipolar disorder. Around 15% of people go on to have manic episodes. So it's a bit of sleuthy work to determine which it is, and you simply don't have any information to call it a bipolar disorder if all you're seeing is major depressive disorder. They don't report any previous manic episodes or hypomanic episodes. Okay, what's a manic episode? Well, increased goal-directed activity or energy, expansive or irritable mood, often irritability, persistently, lots of energy, moving, talking. So they have to have three or more of the following symptoms. And when you watch this video, you'll see many more than just three, and often you will see in any patient more than three. Decreased need for sleep. They won't sleep for days sometimes. They'll feel rested after 1 or 2 or 3 hours, which is not usual, not typical. They're very talkative. They have what's called a pressured speech, a push to talk. The flight of ideas, racing, talking a lot. Talk. Just very distractible all over the place. Intense goal direction towards something. A lot of impulsive behavior, spending, sex indiscriminately, gambling, and so on. And of course, at first there may not be impairment, but in pretty short order, there's a fair amount of impairment and disruption. Okay. So prevalence is only about 0.3%, maybe up to 0.5%. As I've said before, surveys are always wrong. They use an epidemiological catchment survey methodology, and it varies a little bit, but let's say it's 0.3%, 0.3%. And you have to have at least one hypomanic episode and one manic episode and at least one major depressive episode to call it bipolar 1. Bipolar 2, the second form of bipolar disorder, is at least one major depressive episode, but then you need at least one hypomanic, which means less than manic. It's an upward swing, but it's not as severe as the full manic. A manic episode looks psychotic. The person looks psychotic and delusional. A hypomanic can be simply a little bit less sleep, a lot of energy, or a high creativity. In fact, a lot of people probably get hypomanic episodes, and we don't realize that. In the general population, when we're very, very, very creative, we have a period of time where things are really, really running through our heads. We get a lot done, If I had to have a disorder, that would be, I don't know if there is a disorder. I don't think there is a disorder just called hypomanic disorder. I would love to have that one. That would be kind of interesting. All right. So hypomanic episodes, if you have them with depressive episodes, is what bipolar 2 is. But a percentage of those go on to develop full manic episodes later. And then you would change the diagnosis from bipolar 2 to bipolar 1. Yes? So, interesting. So, what I want to go through next is a, whoops, what happened here? An acronym. Ooh, I've lost my light. An acronym associated with this Do you remember the one for depression? Siggy Caps. This one is called Dig Fast, and the med students like this one. Dig Fast is distractibility, so they're very distractible. That's the D. Impulsivity, I. Grandiosity, G. That's the dig. And then flight of ideas, F. Activities, which are increased in goal-directed activity, or really it includes impulsivity like sex and social connections and those sorts of things. And then sleep, less of it. And then talkativeness, pressured speech. That's the T. Okay? All right. So I ask you a discussion question for those of you still watching this video about environmental causes versus heritability, the nature versus nurture question. And so you're going to have to read about this in the PowerPoint and watch this video to answer it. Yeah? Okay. Now, in bipolar 1 disorder, having a single manic episode is enough to substantiate a high risk for an additional episode of a manic state. Now, some people get multiple depressive episodes and an occasional manic episode. They can go into remission, particularly if they're using the appropriate medications that they found to treat it, and not have any more, ever. Or once in a while have a hypomanic state leading to a manic state and need to have their medications adjusted. Every single case is different. Some people cycle really slowly, in other words. Some people cycle very rapidly. I know someone who had a patient who cycled hourly. That's real unusual. Real unusual. Usually you're talking about months in between times. All right. In manic states, what I want you to remember is that a client is at very high risk for drug and alcohol use and abuse, and therefore at risk for addiction, and then also for suicide attempts and completion. About 30% of people with bipolar 1 that is not treated effectively have a suicide attempt, at least one. So, yeah. Okay. So, as you read through this PowerPoint, you'll see a section on famous people who have bipolar disorder, thought to have had bipolar disorder when they lived many decades ago or centuries ago. We can only guess that they did. Now, I have some information on the percentage of writers who have any mood dysfunction like bipolar disorder or depression. And it's really high. It's like 80% of writers have a mood disorder of some kind. Bipolar, 43%. What? I'm not sure I believe that one. Substance abuse, pretty high, and suicide attempts, pretty high. Higher than all of those numbers are definitely higher than the general population. So there's a connection between creativity and these kinds of disorders. Okay. So we know that people who are in these arts are people who are very emotionally reactive and somewhat more emotionally disinhibited, and they have a very high emotional absorption. High emotional absorption is what some people call people who are empaths. Okay, so that's what I think is probably the most the way that the pop psychology literature puts it together. Yeah. Okay. What else? So now let's talk about cyclothymia. Cyclothymia is a disorder in which you have what's called a junior version or junior grade of bipolar 1. So you have hypomanic episodes and mild depressive episodes. If you had to have a disorder that really exists, this would be the one that you would want over major depressive disorder, over bipolar 1, or even over bipolar 2. This is the one you would want. So you swing over a long period of time, usually between mild upward mood, high creativity, energetic, those sorts of things, less sleep, to mild depressive episodes. And of course, the periodicity of these and the intensity of these, the duration of these varies from person to person. Generally, only from weeks to months on average, okay? So the prevalence of this one is really below 1%. So cyclothymic individuals are much rarer than bipolar disorder of either bipolar 1 or 2, and certainly less prevalent than major depressive disorder, which is higher than all of those things. Okay. Now, the last thing to tell you is that bipolar disorder is often confused with a couple of different things. It's often confused, we've talked about it, being confused with major depressive disorder, usually because you haven't seen the client or have the client describe any hypomanic or manic episodes. But more commonly, it's confused with things like borderline personality disorder, maybe ADHD, maybe sleep disorder, and a bit more rarely, schizophrenia, which we'll talk about next time. But borderline personality disorder shares some of the qualities of bipolar disorder. And the main difference is that bipolar disorder is pretty constant on and off throughout all phases of the person's life. And it isn't that they get really exaggerated in their in the intensely elevated or intensely low episodes, unless they have major depression. It's that they are in huge need of close personal contact and consistently worry and fear and look for signs of abandonment. Yes? So I had a client who was so severely borderline that when his partner went out to get some beer and he awoke from his nap, he thought his partner had left him and almost instantaneously poured lighter fluid on his legs and lit himself up. Yeah. So we're talking about, in borderline personality disorder, which we'll talk about in greater detail as the last subject, very, very much different than bipolar disorder. But if you're seeing a client and they have a lot of different diagnoses all over the place, a lot of times it's bipolar disorder. You better have a very good way to do your clinical interviews to determine who's who and what's what. Okay? All right. So with that, I want to end, and you'll see your discussion question. You need to look through the PowerPoint and watch the video. Bye-bye.